Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maharshi's podcast. Joining us today, we have experts in multiple nanotech related fields, such as carbon capture, nanotech batteries, solar cells, and nanomedicine. So, what exactly is nanotechnology? So, nanotechnology is actually science, engineering, and technology conducted at the nanoscale, which is about 1 to 100 nanometers. A nanometer is actually a billionth of a meter, and a human hair is approximately 100,000 nanometers. So at the nanoscale, scientific processes are distorted. Some of these processes can completely be different from what we're used to at the macro scale. An example of this could be gold, but humans could utilize this scale to make exciting impacts across a variety of industries. So like I said before with gold, at the nanoscale, gold actually becomes red or purple. So I guess we could start with batteries. So the device that you're actually listening to this podcast on is running on a lithium ion battery. And today I'm going to be talking to Alayo about how exactly that could be improved with nanotechnology. So, Alayo, could you uh refresh my mind about what nanotechnology really is before we jump into batteries?
Yeah, so basically, nanotechnology is just using different particles that are on the nanoscale in order to improve certain technologies because these different nanomaterials have different properties that we can utilize to improve on certain technologies.
Mm-hmm. So, with your expertise with batteries, how can nanotechnology improve batteries?
So the way that nanotechnology has been improving batteries is that there are a bunch of different materials that are being used right now, such as carbon nanotubes and silicon. And the, the structure of these nanomaterials allows for the lithium ions that are typically used in batteries to travel a lot faster because in normal batteries there's often a two-dimensional structure, and then the ions are only traveling in one-dimensional motion. But with a lot of these different batteries, they can use some of them can use 3D structures and then have the ions travel much more faster. And depending on the different type of material, because there's a wide range being used, you have a greater capacity to hold more energy or to store energy a lot quicker.
Okay. So, my follow-up question is, why can't we do this with lithium ion batteries? So what's preventing us from achieving this without nanotechnology?
Yeah, typical lithium ion batteries, they're often slow. They have a really slow diffusion rate. And with what we get with nano batteries is that we can use them a lot more and they're a lot more durable because lithium ion batteries, they typically use graphite. And while it works right now, it's not going to allow us to have faster batteries that can be charged much quicker and can be used for much longer.
Hmm. And that makes sense. So, so what are the methods of achieving this? So how can we go about um achieving these new types of nanotech related batteries?
So, one of the most simple ways that it's been being done right now comes from a company called Sila Nanotechnologies, and they're using a silicon-based anode. And what they're actually doing is they're just replacing that material with they're just replacing the graphite with that silicon-based anode in typical batteries. And they're doing this because they can use those batteries to store a lot more energy and electricity in the same amount of space, and they can actually use the same manufacturing process to make these batteries. But once the once the technology gets scaled up, it'll actually be a lot more cost efficient and also just give us more power for the same amount of space.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that you did mention a startup earlier, but are there any larger companies that would potentially scale up the technology like you mentioned?
Yeah, that was one of the ones I've just mentioned. They recently raised about $500 million in funds to build their own factory, and they're looking to go into consumer electronics, cars and power grids in order to create a lot more efficiency. There are a lot of companies that are working on this. I know that Tesla is trying to get some nano batteries for its electric cars so that they can become more energy efficient, and then also potentially reducing the cost of a Tesla and making them more appeal to give them more appeal to a wide range of people.
Hmm. So my last question for you is, obviously with Tesla and their cars, so where are some other fields or where else can these batteries be implemented? And what does the future look like?
So, I mean, nano batteries, the great thing about them is that they can be used almost anywhere. And there are even these things called nano diamond batteries that are being developed that are would be actually self-charging batteries that could potentially hold power for thousands of years. So really the potentials with this is really endless because there's so many different materials that can be tested and used. The one thing is that in the future, before they can really become used widely, they need to be tested to make sure that the nanoparticles aren't going to have any ill effects on the environment or on humans.
Yeah. And I guess that does provide a perfect segue to solar cells. So with solar cells, obviously with the energy storing, that's a big factor with solar cells. So I guess my first question for solar cells would be um solar panels and solar energy in an age of so many things solar, what exactly are solar cells and what do they do?
Yeah, so solar cells are methods of capturing light energy, specifically from the sun. And the way that a solar panel works is actually it's comprised of a bunch of little cells called photovoltaic cells. And each of these photovoltaic cells contains silicon and it actually contains two slices of silicon. And you could think of it as an ice cream sandwich of some sort. So one of the silicon wafers are negatively charged and the other one is positively charged. This creates an electric current. And when the photons from the sunlight hit the solar panel, it knocks off an electron from the silicon in the silicon wafers. The electric field kind of funnels this electron out of the wafer. And then like there's a conducting plate that receives this electron and funnels it for energy. So that's basically in short how a solar panel works. And essentially it converts light energy into usable electricity.
So how exactly do these solar cells improve the efficiency of what we already have? Like I mentioned earlier with all things solar panels, solar energy. So like what does it add to the table?
Yeah, so solar energy is for one, it can be implemented into a lot of things. It could be implemented into like cars. Cars have been using solar energy. It's not widely used, but they have cars with solar panels that are able to like transform it and then like run like that. Another thing is by using renewable energy, we can greatly reduce carbon emissions, and carbon emissions are a very big issue with climate change. And I think especially with the push for more renewable energies, solar energy will be one of the key renewable energies to reducing carbon emissions. So that's the key for using solar energy,
Hmm.
reducing that carbon emissions and thus fighting climate change.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier with the cars that have this with the solar panels on them, but you said that they're not widely used. So, what is the biggest challenge that nanotech solar cells are facing in regards to the average consumer's home?
Yeah, so nanotech specifically, for one, it's not extremely efficient yet. So nanotechnology has the potential to make solar cells much more efficient, but as of right now, the technology isn't refined enough to actually be efficient as of now. Another thing is cost, because nanoparticles are very difficult to work with and very difficult to like manufacture. And creating and integrating nanoparticles into solar cells is very difficult and very costly. And because of that, that's like the main barrier that's preventing them from being implemented widely.
Yeah, but besides the cost, are there any hazards or risks that the general public may face in regards to solar cells?
Right. Another thing is the toxicity of a lot of nanoparticles. One thing that a lot of people are looking forward to is having solar panel windows, so implementing nanoparticles into windows to generate electricity. But the problem with that is, again, the toxicity. Um, a lot of nanoparticles are extremely toxic and like they're not good for humans to interact with. So that safety hazard is another thing that's barring its
Mhm.
widespread use.
So are there any companies or startups that are working on solving these issues?
Um, there is a lot of research going around it. Companies they are getting into the market, but there's not too much funding. I think that the main parties that are pushing innovation on this are like big research groups at places like MIT. Berkeley was able to do a lot of stuff with nanoparticles and solar cells. So those like research labs and startups are breaking into the scene as well. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's a big market.
Okay. So if somebody wanted to learn more, where would they go? What resources are available?
Right. To learn more about this specifically, I would highly recommend going to a lot of labs, like for example, MIT's lab has nanotechnology divisions. If you can go to that nanotechnology division, they have a lot of resources on solar energy research, and a lot of labs like that at universities have those websites that you can go and explore a lot more about nanotech and its applications in renewable energy. So yeah, that's the main place I would recommend.
Yeah, so I mean, despite all the issues that I mean might affect the applications of nanotechnology with solar cells in the future, I guess the future does look bright, and hopefully pretty soon, we could start applying nanocells in our day-to-day lives. So that leads us to our next topic, carbon capture, which works with a lot of similar factors to the solar cells. So over the past century even, the temperature on the surface of the earth has increased by approximately 1 degree Fahrenheit. Although this may seem insignificant, we must do everything in our power to prevent this situation from worsening. So as climate change becomes an increasingly prevalent issue, a new innovation has taken the world by storm, and that is carbon capture. So to start off, I wanted to ask, so could you explain to our audience what exactly is carbon capture?
Yeah, of course. So basically, carbon capture is the idea that we could be capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it. So there's really two different techniques here. One of them, well, the first one is removing it from the source. So you could think of a big power plant, something like that. On the actual stacks of the power plant, we could be implementing stuff like filters, stuff like that, that would allow us to remove the carbon dioxide really before it's released into the atmosphere. And that's more where nanotech fits in, but excuse me. But the other technique is removing it from once it's already in the atmosphere, and that has to do more with like biological scrubbers, things like that that can pull carbon dioxide from the upper atmosphere where it like stores itself.
Hmm. So, with these processes and the two ways in which it would work that you described, what exactly does the nanotech do? What role does it play?
Yeah, so the main way nanotech is impacting carbon capture is in the first way I described, where we would be removing carbon from fuel or from power plants, excuse me, mainly. So nanotech could be used to create carbon nanotubes or these nanoporous sponges, which basically act as filters to basically direct carbon from the airstream in these power plants and then into a storage facility. One of the concerns I should just point out with storing carbon dioxide is that we haven't done lots of studies into the long-term effects on an ecosystem of storing carbon dioxide or carbon like solid carbon underground. So that's one concern. But basically the nanotech will basically allow us to create these atomic filters at the atomic level that will either allow only carbon dioxide to pass through and block out the rest of the air, or specifically take out the carbon dioxide and transfer it into a holding cell.
Mm-hmm. So, in regards to these membranes and tubes that you mentioned, will the process of carbon capture via nanotech change in the future? And like, what are some potential changes that, that could be added to this process? Or what are some potential factors that are a part of this process that could be changed for the future?
Yeah, so basically one of the main concerns with these nanotubes is that they are expensive and difficult to manufacture, as with all nanoparticles, because we're dealing with it at the really at the atomic level and creating such small filters that have to be perfectly sized to filter out the carbon dioxide from the air. So one innovation that a lab at MIT is they're actually working on a type of electrode that is coated with carbon nanotubes that actually attracts the carbon dioxide out of the air. So this battery, it's still very early in development, but the idea is the charged electrodes that are being powered by a battery would actually attract carbon dioxide from the air and then perform a chemical reaction on it that would turn it into solid carbon.
Mm-hmm.
One of the advantages of this is that you don't have carbon dioxide floating around, and that solid carbon is much easier for storage. One other advantage with this technique is that these electrodes are actually like polarized. So basically, when the electrodes are charged and the battery is like giving them power, they have a high affinity to attract carbon dioxide. But when they're not being charged, and like let's say the battery runs out of power and you need to charge the battery, then the electrodes have zero affinity to attracting carbon dioxide, but they do attract other parts of the air. So this would allow for a continuous carbon capture, because you would either be attracting the carbon dioxide to the electrodes, or when you're charging the battery, then you would be allowing the carbon dioxide to only flow through, and that would allow you to direct it to a storage facility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense with all these future advancements, with cheaper options and all that. But if we are looking at this from a financial and entrepreneurial standpoint, are there any companies or startups that have a bright future in regards to carbon capture nanotech? And if so, what implications does that have, and what are they working on?
Yeah, so right now, unfortunately, there's not a lot of money in the carbon capture area. There's lots of research being done at places like MIT or UCLA, but I could mention there is one company called Nano, which they're trying to build nanostructured membranes. Um, they actually believe that these will be much cheaper in the future to implement than other biological forms of carbon capture. However, they are partnering with big oil companies to gain funding, because the captured carbon from the carbon capturing process can actually be used, or can actually be injected into oil fields to increase the efficiency of oil production. So it's really like a double-edged sword, because you are removing carbon from the atmosphere, or from the gas, but it's really going back in to these big oil companies and helping them like make more oil, which is kind of counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Ishan. And next, we will be moving on to arguably one of the most important applications of nanotech, that being nanomedicine. So, Ashwin, I wanted to start by asking you, what exactly are we talking about when we're referring to nanomedicine? Are these drugs, robots, or something else?
Well, it's kind of a mix of the two. where we're injecting these nanoparticles into people's systems, and we're using them to treat certain diseases more efficiently than current pharmaceutical options, like drugs like acetaminophen and ibuprofen, things like that.
All right. So how does the nanomedicine find its target? What does it know, or how does it know to attack certain proteins or certain factors that, in your body?
So one of the more up and coming ideas, this was in a study done by MIT, was placing a magnetic field over the region where the drug is needed. So say it's over a tumor or something else that needs attention, then you'd be injecting the nanoparticles coated in this lipid layer into someone's body, and they just be flowing around through the body until they reach that area with the magnetic field. And that's going to cause the nanoparticles inside that lipid layer to start warming up. And that causes pores to start opening in that lipid layer, which releases the nanoparticles into the region where it's needed. And the nanoparticles can help cure the disease from there.
Oh, okay. So, is there any possibility for nanomedicine to potentially treat cancer in the future?
Actually, it's already up and coming now. The drug company Celgene, however you pronounce that, developed a drug called Abraxane, which is using nanoparticles to treat breast and pancreatic cancer. And this was approved by the FDA in 2006.
Wow.
So it's already out there. The thing is, it's a really expensive and hard to manufacture drug.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not very accessible to the general public yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, besides obviously, the main factor cost, are there any other, I guess, harmful side effects or, concerns that the general public should be aware of in regards to nanomedicine?
Yeah, the big thing is, as a lot of people mentioned before, nanotech, some of these nanoparticles are highly toxic. So releasing them in, a wrong area, say like in your brain, that could cause like serious health effects, potentially fatal. So that's the one thing that we're gonna have to overcome, finding a very reliable way to get them to where they're needed and keeping them away from where they kill you, basically.
Mm-hmm. So, what can we expect from nanomedicine in that case for the future?
In the future, we could definitely expect to see cures for some of the big diseases like Parkinson's. There's currently a study underway to treat that, Alzheimer's, several types of cancer. I mentioned the breast cancer one. There's also one coming out for lung cancer, a study. But the thing is, it's going to be still quite a while, at least a few years, since these are really new technologies and haven't been approved by the FDA and other regulatory organizations yet.
Yeah, well, hopefully that time comes soon. But anyway, we'd like to thank you for tuning in to our podcast. I'd like to thank Ishan, Alayo, Ayan, and Ashwin for helping us with this podcast today. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day.